Hi, so this is the short lecture video on some objections to the ontological argument for the existence of God. Okay, so there's two primary objections we're looking at. The first is this idea of what's called, so this is just like a, this is actually, so the person that we read for the ontological argument, St. Anselm, he was in correspondence with one of his contemporaries, and when his contemporaries saw this argument he's making for God, he said, well, wait a second, though. There's a problem with this argument because it seems like you're just defining God into existence. And so he has this argument where it basically says, well, think about the greatest possible island. Okay, just like the greatest possible being. And he says, okay, well, the greatest possible island, right? Is it better for the greatest possible island to exist in reality or in the mind? Well, it seems like reality for the reason we taught in the last video. Okay, well, if the greatest possible island, right, has all the great features of an island, it's better to exist in reality than in the mind, it seems that the greatest possible island exists in reality, okay? And you just keep doing that with all sorts of things. The greatest possible clock, the greatest possible chair, the greatest possible planet, the whatever, okay? And the point is that just seems absurd, right? How can we conclude the greatest possible island exists from the fact that we're just like sort of stipulating, right? There might not be any greatest possible island, okay? They might just all be like pretty good islands, and maybe none of them are like particularly great or anything like that. Or maybe some of them are great, but they're not the greatest possible one, okay? So he's saying, well, look, it seems like you're sort of defining this thing into existence because any greatest possible blank, whatever you want, it's gonna be better to exist in reality than the mind, okay? But that, of course, seems absurd because the greatest possible island doesn't exist in reality, actually. So the ontological argument shouldn't work for a similar reason because if you can't do that with islands, you can't do that with beings, okay, or God in this case. Okay, so that is the one objection. Now, Anselm actually replied to that objection that his contemporary gave, and his reply to the objection was, well, look, actually, so unlike in the ontological argument where we're conceiving of the greatest possible being, Anselm's gonna say, well, actually, can't we always think of a better island, right? So for God, you can't think of a better being than God according to Anselm, right? You can't get any better than God. But for islands aren't like God because you can always think of a better island, right? So imagine the perfect island in your head. Okay, now but can't we make it like a little bit better, right? What if we just add like one tree? Or maybe we make the beach like a little smaller. Or just the temperature just a little bit, right? Or whatever, okay? The point is, Anselm thinks that you can always make the island better. You can't always make God better, okay? And so as a result, the thought is, because you can't actually have the greatest possible island as a thought in your head, because it can always be better, if it can always be better, then you can't ever actually think of it. Well, if you can't think of it and you can't conceive of it, then you can't do the whole move in the last argument where it's like, well, look, if you conceive of it, what's better, to exist just in your mind or just in reality? Or excuse me, both in your mind and reality, okay? So then you can't make that move like in the argument in the first video, okay? So, as a result, Anselm does not think that argument works because you can always conceive of a better island, right? And so as a result, you're not gonna get the greatest conceivable island and you can't run the analogous argument, but you can't think of any better Greek being than God, all right? The second objection is that you might wonder, well, okay, you might attack the idea that it's better to exist than not exist, right? Because remember in the ontological argument, the idea is that it is greater for a being to exist in reality than just in the mind. And you might wonder why that is. Okay, so why is it better to exist than to not exist? You might think that seems like a silly question. You might think, well, it just is, right? I mean, like, just seems like you're a better thing if you exist than if you don't, right? You're more exemplary in some kind of way than if you just were an idea or a thing in someone's head, okay? But you might really push it and think like, well, okay, but why? Like really tell me what the reason is. If you can't come up with one, you might think, well, actually, maybe it's not better to exist than to not exist. As a being, okay? Now I keep saying better, now just to be clear again, when this argument is talking about a being greater or better, it's insofar as it's like a thing, okay? It's not saying like it's practically better, it's just saying that compare something that exists only in your head with something that exists out in reality, which is just better as a being. You're gonna say the thing that exists in reality, right? That's the thought at least. It doesn't mean like practically better or anything like that, okay? So you might just wonder whether it's better to actually exist, insofar as being a being is concerned. If you don't think it is any better, then this argument's not gonna work. If you do think it's better to exist than to not exist, this objection isn't gonna work, okay? So then you're left maybe trying to find a way to figure out maybe if Anselm's reply here doesn't work, or maybe there's some other kind of objection. But at least insofar as this class is concerned, these are the only two objections we'll be looking at to the ontological argument for the existence of God.